talking about how to read biblical narrative, or in other words, how to read stories.
Right. And one of the main ingredients of any good story is characters who encounter conflict and then have to overcome it.
Yeah, let's talk about characters. In most stories, we quickly identify with characters because, just like them, we're in our own story having our own conflicts that we need to overcome.
Yeah, and good stories have characters with relatable struggles. We can watch them react to these challenges in different ways, and we get to see what happens as a result. Through characters, an author can show us their view of what it means to be human. The Bible's no different. Biblical stories use characters as a mirror so we can see ourselves and discover our own human nature in the reflection.
The thing about characters in the Bible is that they can be hard to relate to. I mean, often there's very little detail given about them.
Yeah, biblical authors develop characters differently than modern narratives. They prefer to communicate a lot through minimal detail. For example, we rarely hear what people look like in the Bible, but when we do, it's crucially important for the story.
Like we're told that Saul is tall and David was kind of a runt.
And these become images of their moral character. Saul's height matches his love of status and power to impose authority, while David humbly accepts his low status and allows God to exalt and deliver him.
So people's physical appearances are symbolic.
Yeah, very often. Like Esau's hairy body fits his animal-like behavior, and Jacob's smooth skin matches his deceptive, slippery nature.
What other clues do we get about biblical characters?
Well, often people's names symbolize their role in the story. Abraham in Hebrew sounds like father of a multitude. Jacob means deceiver. Ruth means refreshment. And Saul, his name means the one asked for. He's the flawed king that the people requested.
So by packing all this meaning with very little detail, biblical stories can do a lot in a little space.
And they even leave out things that modern readers want to know about these characters. Like they rarely come out and tell us people's thoughts or motives.
Right, like when Moses saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite, he kills him on the spot. But why? Was this righteous anger, or did he just lose his cool? And was it okay with God that he did it?
Yeah, we're not told. Because biblical authors usually avoid giving moral commentary. They would rather have a character's words and actions reveal their motives, and then leave us to judge their behavior by seeing the consequences. So in the case of Moses, this murders the beginning of a pattern of his anger getting the best of him with bad results. This choice forces him to run and hide in the desert for 40 years.
So it was a bad thing. But he does meet his wife out there, so it's a good thing?
Exactly. It forces you to ponder. Through all these techniques, the biblical narrators keep their stories compact, memorable, but also engaging.
But seriously, was Moses being good or bad? Right? Like in classic stories, there's always a good guy and a bad guy, some admirable hero who faces off against some horrible villain.
Sure, and simplified characters like that are helpful for teaching children there's such a thing as good and evil. But the Bible's not a children's book. Its characters are very complex, a mixed bag of good and evil, just like us. There's hardly any flawless characters in the Bible.
What about heroes of the faith, like Abraham or King David?
So you mean Abraham, who used an Egyptian slave for sex and then lied about his wife 2 times to save his own neck? And David, the man after God's own heart, who sleeps with another man's wife and then murders him? These stories are anything but simplistic. They offer us realistic portraits of compromised people like ourselves. The real surprise is that God keeps working with them despite their failures.
So, just because a person's called by God or wins a battle, becomes successful or wealthy, doesn't mean the biblical author wants me to act like them.
Right. It would actually be really dangerous to imitate most biblical characters.
True. But there must be something admirable in biblical characters, something I can imitate.
Absolutely. Pay attention, and you'll notice that most biblical stories highlight the moments when characters fail or come to the end of themselves, and then they choose radical trust in God's grace and wisdom. It's in these stories that the authors show us how to be a human who truly pleases God through humility and surrender.
Yeah, the fact that God stays committed to biblical characters is a profound statement about the patience and love of God, who is also a character.
Right. And by studying biblical characters, we can observe our own worst tendencies on display. And we see time and again God's gracious response that will see this story through to the end.
Sometimes you're going to come to a place where it doesn't look easy. The road back seems like it's too difficult. And I'm here to tell you that God is going to call you to stay the course when you would rather go the other way. I want to ask you, in light of what God wants you to want, where do you need to stay? In light of the story that God wants you to tell, where do you need to stay the course when it seems so much easier to walk away? It could be in any number of different places. Some of you, you're in college right now and you think, I just can't make it through. It's just too expensive, too time-consuming. The hill is too big, I can't climb it. And so you can do what a lot of people do, and it may be the right thing for you to do, which is just walk away and not finish. Or God may speak to you, hey, you're not a quitter, you're a finisher. And so you keep your head down, and you may work 2 jobs, and you may not be on the 4-year plan, you're on the 7.5-year plan, but you remain faithful. Semester after semester, you plow away. 1 class here, 2 classes there, a summer school class here, and one day you wake up and you realize you've got a degree. And your story is, it wasn't easy, but now I've got a job I couldn't have had otherwise because I am not a quitter, I'm a finisher, and I decided to stay when it would have been easier to quit. That might be your story. Some of you, it might be a problem that comes up in the church one day. You get your feelings hurt. Someone does something and you're like, well, forget them, forget that. Christians, they're all a bunch of hypocrites. Hey, let me just tell you what, the church is not perfect. And if you ever find a church that is perfect, whatever you do, don't join it. Because when your imperfect self comes, you'll screw it up. And so you get your feelings hurt. Well, I'm leaving the church. I'm going to show them. I'm walking away. I'm not staying in this stupid church thing. And that can be your story. It's a lot of people's story. Or I just stopped going to church and I got busy. I used to go to church, and that can be your story. Or you can say, you know what? They hurt me, but I'm going to do for them what Christ did for me. And I'm going to forgive. And I'm going to work through it. And I'm going to stay in there. And then years later is your story is like, hey, man, yeah, I got hurt, but, I forgave them and they forgave me, and, now we're close. And I'm so glad I stayed in the church because spiritually I'm in a place that I never was before. Now, one of the high points of my life is making a difference in this world as the church of Jesus Christ. I don't go to church. I am the church. And my life is different because I decided to stay when it would have been easier to go. Some of you, your story will be with God. Something's going to happen in your life, and you don't like it. You don't understand it, and suddenly you're like, God, if you're going to let this happen when you could have stopped it, then forget you. And your story can be you walked away from God. Just like people all over the world. God, if you're going to let that happen, I can't believe in you. Or you might decide to stay with God, as God will always stay with you because he will never leave you nor forsake you. And so you tell him, I don't understand and this doesn't make sense to me, but God, I realize I'm not God and you are. So I'm choosing to believe in you even when I don't feel your presence. And then time goes on, something happens inside of you, and you start to look back at that thing that you hated, and you realize, I didn't know it at the time, but oh my gosh, God actually used that in my life to make me different. And what the enemy meant for evil, somehow God used for good. And now I know God and his faithfulness in a way that I didn't before. And now I'm living for him and for his glory in a way that I never thought possible. And this is my story, because I decided to stay with God when it would have been easier to walk away because I didn't understand. Some of you, it will be in your marriage. And let me spend a couple of moments here. And as I do, let me say 2 things before I talk about your marriage. Number 1, I don't want to make you feel guilty about past chapters in your story because we can't change the past. Number 2, if you're being abused, if someone is beating you, I'm not telling you to stay and be a punching bag. I'm telling you to get away where you can be safe, where you can be healthy, where they can become healthy, and then you can work on it in a healthy way. I'm not telling you to stay and let someone hit you. What I am saying is, over and over and over and over again, in our society today, we see one or the other spouse say, well, I'm not very happy, so we might as well cash it in. Well, he's not meeting my needs, and the trainer at the gym, he sure compliments me a lot. Or she's kind of boring, and the girl at work, she's kind of fun, and so I'm walking away. He didn't make me happy. I mean, we gave it a shot for a little while, but it just didn't work out. When your marriage gets to that point of struggle, because they all get there because we're sinful people. You need to ask yourself, what story do you want to tell? Well, kids, we gave it a shot for a little while, but we just weren't happy. And that can be the story, and that's a lot of people's story. Or your story might go like this. We didn't like each other. We hate each other. We didn't believe in murder, so we just prayed the other one would die, okay? I mean, it was hell like you wouldn't believe. It is the worst thing ever. But you know what? We made a covenant before our God, so we hung in there. And we got counseling, and we got help, and we made church a priority, and we got a life group, and they spoke into our lives. And it didn't happen overnight, but over a period of time, God started to change us. And now we have a marriage. It's not perfect, but we've gone 27 years, kids, because we believe a covenant is something important, and God has given us something we didn't think was possible. Now, some of you are going to say, but Craig, you don't understand. He cheated on me, or she cheated on me. And adultery is grounds for divorce. So I can leave, right? Yes. Adultery is grounds for divorce. It's also grounds for forgiveness. And some of you may make a decision to stay when you had every right to go. And the best decision you ever make might be to stay when it was far easier to go. Some of you right now, you've been faithful for a long time. You're in the same boring job and you feel like a failure. You're raising the same boring kids and you feel like a failure. You're stuck in the same boring marriage and you feel like a failure. What I want you to hear is sometimes the greatest act of faith is faithfulness, staying where you're planted. And you may not see your Boaz immediately, but I'm telling you what, Galatians 6:9 says, do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not what? Somebody help me. If you do not give up. The decisions that we make today determine the stories that we tell tomorrow. And sometimes the best decision you can make is to stay when it would be easier to go. Father, I pray today that you would minister to us. And God, for those who are in the middle of a trial, a struggle, a decision, I pray, God, that you would direct them and they would have the courage to do what is right over what is easy. All of our different churches today, as you're praying, some of you right now, you're going to recognize you really are. You've got this decision to make. Do I stay the course or do I walk away? What I want to do is I acknowledge that some of you, you're not there at this point. You don't have that decision to make. And I just want to ask all of you to make a decision and a commitment today. When that time comes, will you keep your eyes on Jesus? Will you let him be the author and the finisher? You're not a quitter, you're a finisher of your faith. And if God shows you it's the right thing to do to stay, even though you don't want to, even though you don't see how, even though it doesn't feel worth it, that you will commit to stay when it's easier to go. If you'll make that promise to do what God would lead you to do, would you lift up your hands right now? Just in an act of faith before that time even comes, hands up all over the place. God, I thank you that one day when we face those decisions, you would empower us to do what is right. I pray right now, God, especially for those who are in a job they want to quit, in a relationship they'd like to walk away from, if they're in a spiritual trial, God, I pray that it would become very, very clear what's right. Even as Ruth knew, this is what I need to do. Your God is my God. I'm going to go where you go. God, that if you call us to stay, give us the faith to stay the course. God, give us the courage to say no to what is easy and to say yes to what is right. Then, God, I pray that we would see your blessings, just as Ruth was blessed with Boaz, that you would bring us Boaz blessings as we do what is right.